Our guest today is United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. He has served as U.S. Attorney for nearly 2 years. Our guest today is the top federal law enforcement official for the 18 counties across the top tier of Illinois, with a population of roughly 9 million people. Our guest today manages more than 300 employees, including 172 authorized assistant U.S. attorney positions in Chicago and Rockford. Our guest today was born in Kansas City and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. He graduated from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, where he also earned his law degree. And this is how smart he is. He not only has his mother and father here, who he's going to acknowledge and talk about, but his wife is here, Rachel. Rachel, where are you? Oh, she's not here. Oh, I guess I told you I can't read. Okay, well, she's going to watch this tonight on the video with your 3 children, your 3 beautiful children, Harriet, Oscar, and Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, Zach Fardon. Zach, you're on. All right.
Rachel is cheering from afar, I'm confident. So I do want to say thank you to everybody for being here on a Monday afternoon. It means a lot to me personally and for my office as well. I do want to quickly acknowledge my dad, David Fardon, my mom, Judy Fardon, and my brother, Josh Fardon, and sister-in-law, Patricia, or his fiance, I should say, Patricia. Thank you guys for being here this afternoon. Look, I came here for the first time, had a chance to come here for the first time and the only time in April of last year. And I was about 6 months into the job at that point, and I had the option of talking about whatever I wanted to talk about. And I chose at that time to talk about violent crime in Chicago. It has been 17 months since then, and I am honored to be back. And I, again, have something I want to say about violent crime in Chicago. Our murder rate so far this year is up about 20% from last year. And 20% is a troubling number. But let me give you 2 points of perspective, or 2 points of context that lend perspective. First, last year, 2014, was our lowest homicide rate in Chicago since 1965. That's 5 decades. So the watermark against which we're measuring our 20% increase so far this year is a historically low one. And second, we're not alone. Other major cities across the country have seen even more significant surges in homicide rates so far this year. In Milwaukee, they've seen a 76% increase. In St. Louis, a 60% increase. In Baltimore, a 56% increase. In Washington, D.C., 44%. So when viewed in that light, our 20% increase in Chicago is not as troubling or alarming as many. So I could leave it at that. I could make those 2 contextual comments in response to the inevitable audience question, and I could choose to focus my opening remarks instead on ISIL or cybercrime or public corruption or any of the other mission-critical things that we do at the United States Attorney's Office. I'm not going to do that. And why not? Every face you see on this screen is a child shot and killed this year in the city of Chicago. It is not all of them, but every face you see is a child shot and killed this year in the city of Chicago. Let's focus in on a few. In February, 13-year-old Anthony Diaz was observing an altercation between his 17-year-old sister and another girl in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. It was a fight arranged, by the way, through social media. As Anthony was walking away from the fight, he was shot 4 times and killed. In May, Raheem Demeron, a 15-year-old boy, was standing with a friend on a Bronzeville street when shots were fired from a passing car. Raheem's friend was hit in the ankle and survived. Raheem was hit in the back and killed. In June, 15-year-old Martise Gentry came upon an altercation on Millard Avenue in North Lawndale when one of the kids in that fight opened fire and struck Martise in the chest and the abdomen, killing him. Amari Brown was a 7-year-old spending the 4th of July at his grandma's house in Humboldt Park when somebody sprayed gunshots onto the porch of the house, injuring a woman and killing Amari. Kamaith Hubbard's a 17-year-old who was one of 6 siblings in his Woodlawn family, 3 boys, 3 girls. On July 9th, he was walking behind the Mount Pleasant Missionary Baptist Church when he was shot in the back and killed. That's 5 stories. Every face you see on this screen has a story. Every one of them a child shot and killed this year in the city of Chicago. No place in Chicago is completely safe, but there are neighborhoods on the west and south side of Chicago that are unfairly, disproportionately impacted by this gun violence. By police district, so far this year, the most violent parts of Chicago include the 4th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 11th. And these districts are home to some beautiful Chicago neighborhoods and public places. The 4th district is home to neighborhoods like Avalon Park and South Deering. The 6th district, Auburn Gresham and Greater Grand Crossing. The 7th district, Englewood. The 11th district, Humboldt Park, Garfield Park. So what do these great places otherwise, these great neighborhoods otherwise have in common? Gangs and gang factions. Gangster disciple factions, Latin King factions, dozens of gang factions across these neighborhoods, gang factions that are constantly recruiting new members and are recruiting them young. In our most violence-afflicted neighborhoods, we're now seeing kids affiliate with gang factions as early as the 1st and 2nd grades. And not only are we seeing more homicides across these neighborhoods, but we're seeing more shootings, and particularly indiscriminate shootings, shootings over petty things, disrespect, trash talk, just walking across gang turf lines. Let's take a look at a random weekend this year in the city of Chicago. The July 4th weekend, we had over 50 people shot in Chicago. This slide shows just a few examples of some of those shootings. A 26-year-old was shot in the finger, a 17-year-old was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old in the groin, a 19-year-old in the armpit, a 22-year-old in the ankle, a 19-year-old was shot in the buttocks by somebody riding by on a bike, a bullet in the armpit, a bullet in the finger, a bullet in the butt, a bullet in the foot, random shots, drive-by shots, sprayed shots, and more often shots fueled by social media. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, petty disputes and trash talk that escalates over social media with sometimes fatal consequences. Let me give you a quick case example. In February of last year, there was a gang-related shooting of a man, a 19-year-old named Shaquan Thomas, also known as Young Pappy. Young Pappy was hit but not killed in the shooting. There was a 17-year-old boy, Markeo Carr, who caught a stray bullet and was killed. The next day, Young Pappy tweeted, "I'm still here." A few months later, in July, there was another attempt to shoot and kill Young Pappy, and this time a stray bullet caught and killed a 28-year-old photographer named Will Lewis, who was waiting for a bus in Rogers Park. Wrong place, wrong time. In April of 2015, this year, Young Pappy posted a video called Homicide on YouTube in which he taunted his rival gang members. And then in May, he posted another video, this one called Shooters, in which he pretended to hold up a gun and said, "You don't even know how to shoot." A week later, Young Pappy was gunned down and killed about a block from where he had shot the Shooters video in Uptown. A 22-year-old named Clifton Fry posted comments about Young Pappy's shooting on his Facebook. And 3 days after Young Pappy was gunned down and killed, Mr. Fry was shot and killed. That's 4 dead. A 17-year-old, a 19-year-old, a 22-year-old, a 28-year-old, and at least one 17-year-old trigger puller. And why? No real reason. Disrespect, trash talk, loathing fueled by social media. The point is this: in Chicago, our problem has become more unwieldy. We're seeing more and more indiscriminate shooting, social media spats, resulting in spraying bullets, and often with kids at either or both ends of the gun. So Whatever the statistics this year versus last, and regardless that our surge this year reflects a national trend, my bottom line is this: our violent crime problem in Chicago is a social justice problem. For too long, gun crime has been tearing at the fabric of our social contract in this city. These are our kids. These are our neighborhoods. This problem hits the heart of who we are and who we want to be. As a city, we cannot abide, our Chicago being one where it's okay for kids to die and entire neighborhoods to cocoon in fear. Let me state the honest, if obvious. These are tough issues. Our problem is a problem rooted in social injustices like poverty and joblessness and educational and economic inequality. Kids need parents and mentors and education and work opportunities, and when instead what they see in some parts of our city as early as the first or second grade are gangs and gang factions as a social network and ostensible path to self-identity and success, then we have lost the war before the battle has begun. I am not here to offer soundbite solutions. I am here to talk about some of the key moving parts from the perspective of my office, and I'm here to ask each of you to think about what you can do from your perspective and to carry this conversation forward to your community, your workplace, your church, your family. We have to keep a long view. These are generational issues. But to borrow a phrase from Dr. King, we also have to feel the fierce urgency of now. I want us all to wake up every day and recommit to ending this cycle of violence, of kids dying, of neighborhoods set apart. With the remainder of my remarks, I'm going to touch upon three things that are important from my perspective. First, prosecutions. Second, juvenile justice. And third, I'll talk about the issue of community trust. Starting with prosecutions, at the United States Attorney's Office, our primary job is enforcement. We prosecute criminals. And federally, with our limited resources, we have to be especially careful to go after the worst of the worst, to pick the right individuals and use the appropriate federal tools to help take those individuals off the streets. We are doing just that. Our prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office are bringing big cases right now against violent gangs and offenders. A few quick examples. James Triplett controlled the heroin market in a North Lawndale neighborhood west of Rogers Park. This year, we charged Triplett, his supplier, Levon Collins, and a number of other defendants in connection with that drug trafficking network. This photograph shows a picture of people lined up to purchase heroin from this enterprise before we took it down. And this picture shows a cache of weapons that we seized when we executed that takedown. Double I stands for Imperial Insane Vice Lords. We recently charged 24 double Is with RICO and other federal offenses in connection with drug trafficking and violent crime on Chicago's west side. Among other things, that indictment alleged the gang-related murder of a man named Marcus Hurley. This photograph depicts Hurley's shooter running from the crime scene after he shot and killed Hurley at defendant Nate Hoskins' direction. The man in the photograph was not charged himself because he himself was later shot and killed. These are all gun cases. In the Shelton case, we have charged 11 defendants with a theft and distribution of 111 firearms. In the Woods case, 2 ATF informants were robbed at gunpoint while purchasing guns and bulletproof vests from the defendants. And in the Griggs case, the defendant recently was convicted of selling guns and a bulletproof vest to an ATF informant. This photograph shows an SKS automatic weapon and bulletproof vest seized as part of that case. And so those are just a few quick examples of cases. We have many more, and our investigations pipeline is robust. In nearly all of our cases, we continue to work closely and collaboratively with our local and state partners, including especially the Chicago Police Department and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I want to thank Gary and Anita, my partners, for being here today. We are a like-minded group. Our collective noses are down on the enforcement front, and we have no plans to let up. Of course, at the tail end of any prosecution comes the question of sentencing. Who gets locked up and for how long? And over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion across the country about the issue of over-imprisonment. And that's for good reason. The issue is real. Since 1980, our national prison population has exploded. The total detention population has more than tripled to where, as of last year, the United States had 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. Well, guess what? That costs money. Taxpayer money, and lots of it. Last year, 26% of the Justice Department's total budget went toward housing prisoners. To give you a point of reference, about 7.6% went toward funding all of the United States attorney's offices. So we're now spending way more money housing prisoners than we are hiring prosecutors to go after the bad guys in the first instance. In light of that stark truth, a couple of years ago, the Justice Department launched an initiative called Smart on Crime, under which the department drew a circle around lower-level nonviolent drug defendants and said, as to those defendants, let's stop our historic practice of seeking the highest mandatory prison terms, and instead let's return sentencing discretion to the courts. So Smart on Crime is essentially a policy decision in light of fiscal realities to return sentencing discretion to the bench as to certain nonviolent offenders. Here is what Smart on Crime is not. It is not soft on violent crime. It is in no way an abandonment of the Justice Department's commitment to going after violent criminals. In fact, our U.S. Attorney's Office here remains as aggressive as ever in using our most powerful tools to help take violent offenders off the streets. Look, I've said before, said here, in fact, prosecutions alone will not fix this problem. We cannot arrest our way out of the realities reflected in those slides. But I want to be clear about this too. We have to be aggressive and go after the trigger pullers. We have to do everything we can to take murderers off the streets, including asking our judges to impose significant prison terms for violent offenders, locally and federally. That is being smart on crime, and it's a critical piece of our long-term success. Juvenile justice, the federal court system, at least for now, is an adult system. It is not suited to addressing juvenile violence issues. And yet, you know that a significant part of our problem here in Chicago is a youth violence problem. We have child shooters, we have child victims, and not surprisingly, in predicting adult criminal behavior, a key inflection point is 14, 15, 16 years of age. Kids who pick up guns and commit acts of violence at that age are much more likely to repeat those acts and end up incarcerated as adults. So last year, my office launched a new initiative, our Youth Outreach Forums, in partnership with the Chicago Police Department, the Chicago Public Schools, and the Cook County Juvenile Probation Department. We designed forums to talk to at-risk kids 13 to 17 years old. We began the forums last year in Englewood and Humboldt Park and Garfield Park, and we have now moved inside the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center and are conducting forums there. These forums are structured to educate these kids about the dangers of gang affiliation and recidivism, including especially picking up a gun. The forums are also designed to encourage the kids to continue their education and to connect them to community services and organizations that will give them an alternative to the gang route, a network, a pathway that is good instead of bad. We've made these forums evidence-based. The University of Chicago Crime Lab is tracking kids who complete the forums against placebo groups so that we can assess results. That will take time, but if we're able to show that we have moved the needle on even some of these kids' fates, then we will have done something truly important. Just a few weeks ago, I attended one of our youth forums at the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, and while the kids that I met that day presumably may have done something wrong to land in detention, it could not have been more clear to me that these were not hardened criminals. They were kids. They were hopeful, they were struggling and looking for help. So I am very proud of our United States Attorney's Office for leading the way forward and hosting these forums along with our partners. Having said that, these forums are not a panacea. What they are, for me, is a start. They're a catalyst. They're a way for us to shine our flashlight in an area that dearly needs greater attention for us as a city to succeed long-term in the fight against violent crime. So that is another critical piece of our success, or our pathway to success. We have the hammer of prosecutions and prisoners for violent offenders, and we're working to extend the rope, the lifeline, to kids who have wandered down the wrong path and need our help before it's too late. Which brings me to another key ingredient from the perspective of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And the last broad topic I'll talk about during my brief time today, community trust. The issues that became front and center after Ferguson and Staten Island and Baltimore and on down the list. Those issues are directly relevant to our fight against violent crime right here in Chicago. Distrust between communities and cops breeds violence. Distrust causes kids to make bad decisions, it causes cops to make bad decisions, and it makes it harder to solve violent crimes when they occur. And so this issue of trust between communities and cops is huge. In December of last year, after the no prosecution announcement that came out of Ferguson, my office hosted a community roundtable, and we had there Attorney General Eric Holder, Mayor Emanuel, Anita Alvarez, Gary McCarthy, other law enforcement leadership, a number of religious and community leaders from across Chicago, and some kids from the most violence-afflicted neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. To be frank, I had no idea what to expect going into this. This is, again, something not exactly in the traditional wheelhouse of a U.S. Attorney's Office, but I found it valuable. It brought together passionate leaders from across different parts of the city, and we had a candid and thought-provoking discussion about issues of policing and trust. And so we did it again in March of this year, and we've got another one scheduled for November, and so long as there's a need, my office will keep making the time and sending the invitations. The most remarkable aspect of the roundtables for me has been the kids. We've had a great group of young women and men from the most violence-afflicted neighborhoods, and we've also had a wonderful group of Chicago police commanders and officers assigned to those same neighborhoods. And the back and forth between the kids and the commanders has been, for me, truly enlightening. Here is the nub of what I have taken away from it. From the kids' perspective, what they want from police is respect. They don't want to feel judged by the color of their skin or whether they're wearing sagging pants or just because they're hanging on the block with gang members. What they want instead is to be judged on their own merits. And when police don't know them personally and lump them in with other kids in the neighborhood who dress the same way or look or talk the same way they do, that breeds resentment and distrust. From the officer's perspective, they want to succeed. They want to be good at their jobs and make the neighborhood safer. What also became clear to me through this dialogue, though, was they too want to be judged on their merits. They don't want to feel embattled or even vilified simply because they wear the badge. They want instead to be respected by those people they are risking their lives to protect. And from both sides, the common ground for improvement, connectivity, knowing each other, making an investment of time and goodwill outside of the context of bad things happening. Whether it's the police hosting a neighborhood barbecue or attending a park cleanup or participating in a local basketball tournament, whatever the vehicle, whatever the context, finding ways for the officers to get to know the kids and the kids to get to know the officers, to where when an officer comes across a kid at a crime scene or in an investigation, that prior relationship, however deep, exists. When you have that, things will not always go perfectly, but they tend to go a whole lot better. And I'm grateful that we have seen more and more of that from our community leaders and the great women and men of the Chicago Police Department. Let me ask you to stop for 1 minute and think about what it means to serve as a Chicago police officer. Police officers are by and large the noblest of our public servants. They are citizens who have made a decision to take a job at very modest pay, where every day they wake up not knowing if they may get hurt or even killed. And why do they do that and wear that risk? I will tell you my view, based on years of firsthand experience working with cops. Most do it because they care. They want the same things nearly all of us want: to be happy, to love, to have a family, to enjoy a safe neighborhood, to live an impactful life. Police officers are not separate and apart from our communities. They are our communities, no different than you and me. And they fundamentally deserve a presumption of our respect and trust. For our system of justice to work, people have to believe in that system. With no trust, there is no belief. This issue of trust is obviously not unique to Chicago. In fact, there's a national discussion happening right now, and a watermark moment in that national discussion, in my opinion, occurred earlier this year when the FBI director, Jim Comey, gave a speech at Georgetown University. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to jump online and find it. Director Comey talked about the relationship between law enforcement and the diverse communities that law enforcement serves. And in reflecting upon that relationship, Director Comey identified what he called his own hard truths. Well, I share Jim Comey's hard truths. Here they are. First, we in law enforcement have to be honest and acknowledge that much of our history is ugly when it comes to issues of race. At various points in our nation's history, law enforcement has enforced a status quo that was brutally unfair to disfavored groups. That is an ugly part of our national inheritance, and we need to accept that. Second, we all, inside and outside of law enforcement, have to be honest about the widespread existence of unconscious bias. By understanding latent bias and talking about it, we may not always be able to completely eliminate those reactive instincts, but we can help our behavior in response to them. And third, there is a cynicism that can happen to people in law enforcement over time based on observation and experience, and that cynicism can lead to mental shortcuts and can create unfair treatment. And in addressing that problem, we have to be honest and recognize that it's not as simple as changing who we hire and how we train law enforcement. The truth is significantly harder than that. We have to address the tragic reality that because of our nation's past sins, young men of color, particularly in urban neighborhoods, too often inherit a legacy of crime and prison. So yes, we have to talk about cops, but we also have to talk about changing that legacy and how we create more and better options and opportunities for those young men. Those are Jim Comey's hard truths, and they're mine. And I think they belong to us all. Those hard truths go to the heart of everything that I've been talking about today. Our violent crime problem in Chicago is hard. Our history with regard to race in Chicago is hard. Poverty is hard. Inequality is hard. Childhood is hard. Policing is hard. Trust is hard. One thing about hard things in life, it seems to me, is they require balance and measured circumspection and patience and bravery to figure them out and to fix them. Hard things do not come with easy or quick solutions. This is Taiwan Poindexter, 14 years old. 8 days ago, Taiwan was walking with a group of his friends to play basketball in his North Kenwood neighborhood on the south side. As a car passed by, somebody shouted, "Is that them?" and started shooting. One of the boys that Taiwan was walking to play ball with, a 15-year-old, was hit in the shin and in the ankle. He survived. Taiwan was hit once in the head, and he died that night in a driveway on the corner of 44th and South Greenwood. All of these things that I've been talking about today, prosecutions, youth outreach, community trust, these are important ingredients from the perspective of the U.S. Attorney's Office in helping to get our city to a better place. But there is much, much, much work to be done. Work in our courts, work in our government, work in our schools, work in our churches, work in our homes, work in our streets. Each of us has to stop waiting for someone else to solve this problem and recognize that this problem belongs to us all. I want to close with a point of pride. The events of Ferguson were about a year ago. And in the wake of those events and the many other national crises that have happened over the last year, we have seen dozens of rallies and protests across the city of Chicago. And unlike many other places, our protests have been almost entirely peaceful and thoughtful and impactful. And there are a number of civic and religious leaders in Chicago who have played and continue to play an important role in that process. And at the same time, law enforcement, including especially the Chicago Police Department, has respected the protest process and has repeatedly allowed our communities to be heard while at the same time ensuring the public safety. That is called democracy. And I've come to believe we're pretty damn good at it here in Chicago. And that is a reflection of the goodness of this place, the strength and love our citizens hold for the city and for each other. That same strength and love, in my opinion, is the key to our long-term success in the fight against violent crime. We as a city have to muster and leverage our best leadership, our best philanthropy, our best creativity, our best resources, our best goodwill, our best intentions. And we have to realize, we have to recognize that this fight is a law enforcement fight, and it is an economic fight, and it is an educational fight, and it is fundamentally a fight to overcome tragic aspects of our national inheritance. The stakes are high. The place we love hangs in the balance, but I believe we can succeed and will succeed because of who we are in Chicago. Every one of us has to see the long horizon while every day waking up with the fierce urgency of now. I want to again thank you guys for being here on a Monday and for giving me an opportunity to come talk to you about this important issue, and look forward to taking any questions you may have. Well, here I thought I'd done a pretty good job. I forgot my mom, Judy Fardon. Thanks for being here, Mom.
City Club member, we don't let that go, just so everyone knows. Okay, bring him on up. We've got Mark easier names. Limonati? Close? Close enough. Lamani, right over there. Big guy, better pronounce it. All right. How will your office address the opening? Well, this is a good question, not exactly what you talked about, but this is the City Club. How will your office address the opening of Illinois' marijuana dispensaries? 25 words, you can handle it.
So there's a conflict between federal law and state law when it comes to the issue of marijuana, but the Justice Department and our office in particular has long been in the business of investigating and prosecuting major drug narcotics traffickers, not users, not peddlers, major narcotics drug traffickers. We will continue to do that, and there's in fact a DOJ-wide policy that kind of sets the guidelines for the kinds of cases that we can and should prosecute. So fundamentally, this is not really going to impact what we bring and how we bring it in the Northern District of Illinois. Having said that, there is a conflict in the laws, and over time, I suppose we'll all see how that conflict gets resolved.
Mike Bauer, you had the same question, so we'll let that pass. Dave Lundy, printed, thank goodness, has the rollback of gun laws and the inability to get new laws as basic as background checks passed created a meaningful problem for your office and other law enforcement?
I suspect my friend Gary McCarthy would love to get up and answer that question. And Anita. Represented by counsel today. Right, exactly. He's taken 5. And Anita as well. Look, I don't have a voice in the legislative process. In fact, I am precluded from lobbying or participating in the legislative process, so I can't and don't espouse views about gun laws. What we do is we use the tools that we have from a federal perspective to make as much of an impact as we can when it comes to the issues of guns. Do I think there are too many guns in the hands of wrong people in the city of Chicago? Of course I do. And what we're committed to doing at the U.S. Attorney's Office is continuing to work with our local and state partners to make sure that we use the federal tools and resources in a manner that will be most impactful toward ending the kind of cycle that you've seen in my presentation today.
Wow. Hard to believe the moderator has a question. How many have ever heard of Frederick Thrasher? Okay, I'm on good grounds. How many ever heard of a book called The Gangs of Chicago? There you go. Hyde Parker, of course, you know, Weston. 1929, Frederick Thrasher wrote a book about 1,313 gangs in the city of Chicago. 1,313. Forced to read it as a grad student. Almost no one got killed. Today, I don't know how many gangs we got, subplots, sub-gangs, but we were killing people. 672. Almost twice as many then, and almost no one got killed. Not they didn't try, but no one got killed. Obviously, guns are the factor. Comment on that rather impertinent question, if you would, Mr. Is guns the answer to why people are killing people instead of just old-fashioned, pardon the expression, beating them up?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I mean, here's the thing. As I just said, are there too many guns in the hands of wrong people? Are guns too accessible? Absolutely they are. The other thing that I've talked about today is, number one, a big part of our problem is a youth violence problem. Not only the victims, but the trigger pullers, and all of us know how impulsive behaviors can be at those young ages. And so if you have somebody who's behaving impulsively and maybe reacting out of anger to a taunt or to a disrespect, and a gun is readily accessible and available, is that a bad paradigm in terms of violent crime? You bet it is. And I think the key for us as a city is to make sure that, I mean, guns is one category in which we can try to tackle the problem, but so are those impulses, and so are making sure that our kids in these different communities are seeing opportunities and ways to connect and develop that are different than what they see through the gang route.
Good answer. Last question, and then we'll try it up. Ed Tracy. This is for all you guys back there, led by John McCormick. I could see him back there. Thank you for coming. Ed, we got to work on your printing here. Thank you for coming to the City Club of Chicago. What can the media do to redirect focus on the issues you addressed today? Actually, how about direct?
Well, I don't know if this will be a surprise or not, but my head is off to the media in Chicago. I think that the coverage, in the print media with the Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune of the homicide and the violent crime issues has been pretty terrific since I took this job almost 2 years ago. There is a constant drumbeat of attention to the homicides and to the nature of the different issues that we're facing. I, of course, would love to see more attention to success stories from the law enforcement perspective and the great work that not only the Chicago Police Department, Cook County State's Attorney's Office, but the FBI and the DEA and the ATF, and you go down the list, you got a lot of wonderful, laudable law enforcement folks out there putting their lives on the line constantly to help address these issues. I would love to see that heralded more than it is, but I think we have a very sophisticated media in the Chicago market, and I think that they are focusing on the right issues, and I think, again, all of us need to just make sure from our perspective, whatever that may be, that our oar is in the water and that we're trying to comport ourselves in the same way.
How about a round of applause? Well done.